We will hear argument this morning in case 2512.
Grievances we could go into with this system. I think we could be here for hours.
National Collegiate Athletic Association.
I think we have some proof, even a few years into NIL now, that people care about the logo.
There are too many people in power who have no desire to give up that power.
The NCAA's ever-shifting decisions, not stable decisions.
Does the concept of amateurism in college athletics even matter anymore?
They've capped it again without any sort of collective bargaining.
We'll finish with our unilateral decision. Everyone, welcome back to another episode of Unilateral Decisions. Today, we're talking something I'm excited to talk about, sports gambling in the NCAA. We'll get into Brendan Sorsby and the legal side of that, but to backtrack just on the general history of gambling, Joe, you've been an administrator. You've had to talk to people about why they cannot gamble on sports. What is the NCAA's stance on on gambling of any sort, not even just NCAA sports?
Oh, how far have we come from the days where you couldn't even be in a fantasy baseball league back in the day? I mean, coming through athletics, even as a student, it was made very, very apparent to you that if there is a sport that is played in college athletics, you are not allowed to gamble on it. No bets with your friends, no NCAA basketball tournament pools. No fantasy sports, as I mentioned. And then, I mean, Sam knows the ins and outs of this better than I do, but within the last year, I mean, NCAA was passing legislation that would allow athletes to bet on professional sports. And now here we are with this situation, which, as we'll get into, is not just about gambling. There's a lot more to it. And it's quite a bit more nuanced than I think people are giving it credit for. But, yeah, it is a far cry from what I was raised in college athletics on.
You know, I gambled when I was a student, but I was not a worker at the time. Get into college athletics, you no longer gamble. You follow the rules, and you know that. The moment I got out of college athletics, let's go hit the sports book. So I get the appeal. I understand the excitement of sports gambling. This is not a sports gambling podcast. We do not endorse sports gambling. It's very problematic for a lot of people, but it's pretty awesome. So, Mike, walk me through some of the punishments that have happened in the past. I mean, I think Rick Neuheisel at UW, I think even in the pro sports world with Hall of Famers that didn't end up being Hall of Famers and Pete Rose. So just how seriously have people taken the punishment for gambling on sports in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that calls the integrity of competition into question has always been taken extremely seriously. And I think there's a ton of alignment on that when we talk about the leagues and the players and the owners and anyone involved in the fans, that's just a line that can't be crossed. And so the punishments have always fit the crime. And, there's a ton of examples. And in the college level, the examples you've generally seen have been more with regard to actual point shaving and less about the athletes themselves being the ones to place the bets. Certainly the proliferation of online gambling and all the other things has made it a ton easier, and it's changed the deck of how this looks. But so much of the collegiate history around sports gambling punishments have been based on athletes just actually influencing the outcomes of the games, which, again, very nuanced in the situation, a lot of factors into it. It's not really what anybody is claiming here, but even just the thought that it could be an option and it could be a conflict of interest generally leads the punishment to be extremely harsh and severe.
It's interesting that the NCAA started to move towards maybe a less harsh stance, because I remember having conversations about why I couldn't bet on Premier League soccer because Boise State's women's soccer coach might know somebody that has inside information in the Premier League. And it's like, that's not realistic. But Sam, why did the NCAA start to maybe consider loosening the grip on their stance?
I think they kind of had to be. I think it's just a situation where gambling has become such a big part of our society at this point, and a big part of sports at this point, where we are just inundated with gambling ads day after day. If you watch sports, like a lot of people have noted the irony, in this situation, the Sorsby situation, of there'll be articles written where they'll talk in the article, because it's sponsored, about like the odds of Sorsby being able to play or being able to win the Heisman or all these different things. PTI last night might have either yesterday or on Monday they spent 5 minutes talking about the whole Sorsby situation, and then immediately after, once they had to commercial, was an ad for DraftKings. So it's everywhere. And I know as a professor myself, as an educator myself, someone who, of course, has a lot of young men and women in my classes, I'll listen before my classes. I'll walk around the classroom before class starts, and so many of the, especially young men in my classes, are talking about sports gambling. They're on sports gambling sites because it is so much of a thing, and it's so much of a. We're just, again, so inundated with gambling at this point, ever since the Murphy decision in 2017, that it's really hard to avoid, and it's really kind of unrealistic to think that athletes who are the same demographic as my students, obviously, are not going to be gambling.
I also think that I can remember sitting in department meetings and really trying to speak up for the fact that it's important to acknowledge the reality of it. It's important to acknowledge that it is happening, and not just at the college level or within that age group, but the fact that I talked before about, like, when you keep information secret, it becomes more valuable. And I think that this ties very much into injury reports and all the other things that we're seeing in college athletics that appear to be more transparent than they had been before, because it decreases the value of that information. And it's because sports gambling is just, it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. It is in every TV commercial. They're advertising in it, everything that Sam mentioned. But, I can remember sitting in the department meetings and just like, we need injury reports. We need injury reports because we need that information to be in the sunshine, and we need people to not have that valuable information secretive, because all of a sudden it becomes more valuable, and you're putting athletes in a really tough spot. And so that's one more touch point of gambling being just in their daily lives, is because someone on the outside is asking for insider information that's in their locker room that nobody else knows. And the more of that information, and I understand the HIPAA concerns and all the other stuff, but you can anonymize the reports enough and dumb it down enough. But availability reports, at the very least, has at least curbed some of that insider information to make it less valuable. And it's all coming back to, because it's just so much more common now. It is in everyone's daily language. It's what you see every day if you consume sports, and it's just real. And so I applaud the NCAA for acknowledging that, in the fact that they have tried to be a little bit more understanding of just like the world that we're living in. And I think that this situation may set us back a little bit, but I do applaud them for the effort that they took toward that, because it's just everywhere now.
So if you're watching this podcast, you probably know who Brendan Sorsby is. Transfer quarterback, comes Texas Tech for a lot of money. There's a lot of investment in him to play for Texas Tech. Comes to light, he admits he has a gambling issue. Walk me through just how severe or excessive those gambling reports are.
I don't know what can totally be taken as fact at this point, but certainly they're not shying away. Him and his counsel are not shying away from the fact that he has gambled extensively, and it dates back before he was of legal age. It shows up in places where, in jurisdictions that's not allowed. Multiple schools that he has been at, and he has seemingly admitted to gambling on his own team. And those are the things that I think draw the headlines and draw the eyeballs and make everybody think that this is kind of crazy talk, that we're even having this conversation about legal. Is there even a fence to straddle here? Which I think is, why the details are important. Joe alluded to that this is beyond whether or not it is morally accurate or even criminally, against the rules for him to place these bets. That's really not the conversation that this has turned into over the last week or so. But it certainly seems extensive, the lengths to which, he's admitting to gambling.
Yeah, no, he and his counsel in the hearings and in all the briefings fully admitting that he has been gambling. Like, this is not no, this is incorrect. I haven't been gambling. No, he's been clear. Like, I have a gambling addiction. Of course, that means I've been gambling. What he has said in his briefs has been $90,000 worth of bets, mostly micro bets, in terms of little $5, $10 bets on various different things. Just gambling everywhere, and really just a pattern that really just screams out pervasive gambling problem, because it's not something where I think we kind of honestly I think that a lot of the fear is like big bets on inside information type of stuff where that really kind of gets to a lot of the heart of the integrity issues. But he's been just gambling all over, and which that certainly doesn't excuse his behavior, and certainly doesn't excuse his betting on his own team while he was at Indiana. But just kind of, just kind of an interesting story, because it's very much not, just looking at kind of the gambling history here, it's very kind of different than like the Boston College points giving scandal, which of course they weren't placing the bets, but still it was very large bets because they had insider information.
Yeah. Mike talked about whether or not he was going to find a fence to straddle, and they found one. I mean, they took this, made it not about gambling. They made it about mental health. And that's where I think the nuance is. I mean, Mike touched on it. It's the public, and the other Big 12 schools especially are absolutely, and rightfully so, they're completely up in arms right now, because to them, this is solely about gambling on your own team and the integrity of the game. But, his counsel made this about mental health and found an argument and a sympathetic judge. And here we are.
Incredible lawyering. I think we have to respect that, if
100%.
nothing else.
Jeffrey Kessler is the best.
So walk me through this injunction. How legally does it happen?
Well, I think Joe hit the nail on the head. It's because Jeffrey Kessler made it about mental health. It's because Kessler in his briefing, Kessler in his exhibits, Kessler in everything he did in this case said, pounded the table and said, as soon as this came to light, which, yes, of course, he was caught, but it's very common for people with addiction to not really do anything about it until they're caught, until they really screw up. But once that happened, he went 35 days into rehab, and he came out, and he is, this changed person now, according to Kessler. Kessler included exhibits from all these mental health professionals, therapists, psychiatrists, people at the rehab clinic, really just making the case, like Joe said, that this is a mental health issue that needs to be managed, but also at the same time is something that he is taking great lengths to do, and that one, the NCAA suspension, but banning him for life is essentially punishing him for this mental health issue, and two, that it's in his best interest, as given this mental health situation, to be able to do what he loves to do, which is play college football. And if he's not able to do it, if he's not able to have that camaraderie, it's more likely he's going to relapse. So that's the argument that he made to the judge. There was no written opinion, so we don't know exactly for sure what the judge was deciding here. There's that little 4-page order that's been floating around. Oftentimes, and I can't say for sure whether this is the case, but oftentimes, those kind of standard written orders are written by the plaintiff's attorneys and kind of presented to the judge to sign. It kind of looks like that might be the case to my eyes. Can't say with 100% certainty, but either way, we just do not have at this time kind of clear information on what exactly the judge saw, but we can assume that he took the plaintiff's arguments at face value.
How much of the injunction itself, and this may be conjecture, but how much of the injunction is more so about the fact that if the final ruling comes down one certain way, then the kind of like, innocent until proven guilty, I guess, where the injunction allows for the process to play out without the punitive measures being taken, which would be irreversible at that point. How much of that plays into this?
Oh, that's a huge part of it. That's the entire basis for an injunction in the first place. It's the idea that, by the time we have a trial on this, and as has been reported, trial hasn't been set for until February 2027. So by that date, it's pretty clear that this is the case. Getting to trial takes a really long time. So judges issue injunctions at the request of the plaintiffs if they can show over 4 different factors, and one of them is the amount of harm, irreparable harm that would be suffered in the meantime. And if it's something where as part of this argument, the plaintiff is able to show that I would suffer irreparable harm, it'd be something that cannot be cured by mere money alone after after trial. If I were to win, then the judge may be inclined to issue an injunction to say, we're going to stop this harm from happening to you while this case is being heard. And, from there, we're kind of getting to the intricacies of it, because it's like, okay, well, is this actually preserving the status quo, or is this actually, kind of forcing a party, the defendant, to do something that they normally, they wouldn't have to do. That gets really complicated. And of course, there's going to be a high standard if you're looking to change the status quo with an injunction. But I think it's part of it. And in all these eligibility rule cases, there's been some inconsistency as to whether it actually does change the status quo to allow the player to play, because some judges have seen it as, okay, well, actually, if the NCAA was enforcing the rules properly, then the athlete would be able to play. But it is kind of there's a weird kind of situation, because it's really not really a status quo injunction.
Well, it's weird now, but NCAA's requested an expedited trial, correct?
Expedited appeal.
Okay, an expedited appeal. You got to get really serious with your language. You can't be mixing words here. If that gets bumped up, like even a couple months from February, like to December or November or October, like this is playing out during the middle of the season, and this is going to be a massive, massive. This whole case has me. I can't even think straight. It is going to be a storyline throughout this entire season.
Oh, of course it is, because barring something else happening, it is very clear, at least based on the legal system, that Sorsby is going to be able to play after this 2-game suspension that the judge imposed as part of the injunction. Which is another reason this injunction is really kind of strange, because you don't see judges kind of creating their own
NCAA
suspensions, which very, very kind of strange kind of situation there. But yeah, this is absolutely going to be playing out during the season. The expedited appeal, it does expedite it. It does make it so that it's not going to take, like, for example, there are 2 other cases that the NCAA has appealed to the Texas Court of Appeals. Both are eligibility rule cases. One involves Texas A&M basketball player Rashawn Agee. Another involves Indiana football player Lewis Moore. Those appeals were filed in October and November of 2025. We're sitting here in June of 2026. They both just got oral arguments, I think, last week. And they, of course, have not been decided since then. So it kind of shows you how long this takes when it's not expedited. And, from everything I've heard, even if it is expedited, it still takes quite a bit of time. So I know there's I don't have Texas litigation experience myself, but I saw on Twitter a really experienced Texas attorney kind of talking about the timeline. And he said, even with the expedited hearing, that it's probably not going to lead to a decision before the end of the season.
Which is remarkable to me. So if the NCAA can't do anything about it, we'll get into what that might mean for the NCAA. But first, I don't know if rogue justice is kind of the word to use here, but there are other programs that have talked about trying to punish Texas Tech. So what are some of these rumors out here that others who are not the NCAA might try to impose their own sanctions against Texas Tech?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting piece of this conversation that I would love to hear, people's thoughts and the legal piece behind it. But you've got a couple different universities who have come out very vocally and said, we're not going to schedule Texas Tech in anything, kind of trying to just really put the pressure on, like you mentioned. I think you've got an entire conference in the Big 12 that all the membership of that conference, at least what's been reported, is that they feel very, very strongly and very unanimously, other than one school at this point, that this can't happen. And it goes back to the integrity of the game and the competition and everything else. But I think those are the Big 12 has theoretically an option to go nuclear on Texas Tech, basically not following the rules of the membership of the conference if they allow him to play. And you also have Texas Tech that I kind of feel a little bad, to be honest. I do feel a little bit bad because I feel like, well, no one will ever say this, I got to imagine to a certain degree, they felt like they could back Brendan, they could back the athlete, they could have his back, they could support him all the way through this, and then it would never come to this. And they'd be able to say, we're sorry, we did everything we could to help and support you, but this didn't go our way. And here they are having to go, oh, we can play him. And now we've said all along for the last couple of months that this is what we want.
Yeah,
this is the outcome we want.
So
now
that's a good point.
If they do quote unquote the right thing and say, you gambled, like you said it, you're not going to play for us. Like, he's probably got a lawsuit against Texas Tech.
Maybe. Depends on kind of the arrangement there. If there's any kind of, maybe there's some kind of contract or quasi-contract arrangement between them, or they would. I gotta assume he's got some sort of case. If he was able to win this one, I gotta assume he's got a case. If Texas Tech decides to say, you can't play. But I think that, from a practical perspective, what did you hire Jeff Kessler for? Like, Jeff Kessler is not a cheap attorney, not even close. He's probably billing definitely in the four digits per hour. Far more than I could charge. I can tell you that. But clearly there was an idea here where you wanted to win. You definitely didn't sandbag it, but I agree. I think there's probably a lot of people in Texas Tech who are kind of thinking, we'll go through the process. We'll see what we could do. But we don't really expect to win this. This is kind of this is really a stretch. We're doing everything we can for Brendan. And I don't think they're necessarily upset that he's going to be able to play, but but clearly they knew this was going to be a firestorm, and they probably, and I think they probably would have been happy with either outcome.
Yeah, I think that's true. And so I'm curious on the Big 12 side of things that they could take a really, really strong approach here. What is different about the Big 12 making that decision than the NCAA and what was just enjoined on this? I guess I'll just start there with one question at a time. What is different?
I think that's still a little bit unclear exactly, because there may be an argument, and we are in case of first impression here. We're in a situation where, I think anyone who would tell you the answer to this question probably, they may or may not know it for sure. Because I think an argument is probably going to be made if the Big 12 does do something that, the Big 10 is part of the NCAA, and therefore it's still violating the injunction by the Big 12 doing something about this. If I said Big 10, I meant Big 12. Easy to do, I guess. But I don't know how strong that argument would be. The Big 12 is a different entity. So if they decided to do something about this, for one, I think they have two different paths, and I think that kind of goes to this question to a certain extent, because they can try to suspend Sorsby, and I think the end result would either be Sorsby going to the judge and saying, hey, this is, like I said, this is, the Big 12 is part of the NCAA, and this is still violating the injunction, or the NCAA needs to step in and make sure the Big 12 doesn't suspend Sorsby because they have to follow this injunction. Or two, even if that doesn't work, Sorsby files a new lawsuit in front of in the same court, likely in front of the same judge, because the initial judge would recuse himself and make the exact same arguments, except replace the NCAA's name with the Big 12. And it would probably be successful, right? Because it's the exact same argument. You're being suspended for the exact same kind of behavior and all these kind of things. Nothing really changes. But the more interesting question, I think, and something that the NCAA certainly can't do right now, because it would violate the terms in the injunction, but maybe or maybe not, they could do without it. Or they definitely could, because they have the rule of restitution, they have all these different things. But the Big 12 could try to punish Texas Tech. Mm-hmm. They could try to do a lot of different things against Texas Tech to really pressure them into not playing Sorsby. Anything from, they could kick them out of the conference. I don't think they're going to go that far, but I think back to earlier this year, there's a really interesting kind of scenario in a lawsuit between Utah Valley University and the WAC, and completely different circumstances that led to this. This was not, a player gambling, anything close to that, but it was Utah Valley decided they were going to leave for the Big West Conference, and they had $1 million buyout fee in their grant of rights, and they said, we're not going to pay it. And the WAC said, okay, well, if you're not going to pay it, we're not going to show you on television. We're not going to allow you to compete in championships. We're not going to do all these different things. And Utah Valley filed a lawsuit and ended up settling. Not really something where we can draw a lot of legal conclusions from that, at least as far as I remember. But those are the options available those are just a few of the options that are available to these conferences. The Big 12 bylaws has been reported over the past few days, very, very extensive with the amount of power that's given to the conference to be able to punish schools for conduct that's materially adverse to the best interests of the conference. And I think at this point, the only limit is their creativity, though, of course, the other limit there is Texas Tech is certainly going to sue over that. And that will be very interesting to see.
Am I crazy to think that I understand the argument of the mental health side of things and the addiction component, but am I crazy to think that should be more of a concern for the opponents on the field, to where you say, yeah, I get it. You're having a hard time, and I can be empathetic to that. But if you've admitted that you're addicted, I have no reason to believe you won't do it again. And I just feel like there's more concern from that juncture. For me, again, we go back to the competitive integrity piece of it, but it's like, okay, a lot of people get caught doing something, and you can say, okay, we've reprimanded you. You've been punished. I can feel confident that you can go forward and maybe not repeat your same mistakes. Your defense is that you're addicted. And this is something that cannot happen again. It cannot happen again. So how am I supposed to feel secure in that?
That's a really, really tough question. It is a very, very difficult question. And I definitely see that. I definitely see the argument there. I definitely see the idea that, yes, he's admitted that he's addicted to gambling. And regardless of, he did 35 days of rehab, but still there's the risk that he's going to relapse. There's the risk he's going to do it. And if he does it in a way where, now he's a starting quarterback of a Big 12 team that's looking to make a CFP run, it could be so much more impactful than when he was betting on Indiana football when he was, redshirting and not even playing. I take a kind of a unique or not unique, certainly not unique, but I feel like I have a different kind of perspective on this than a lot of people in this conversation. Full transparency and disclosure, I've actually been battling some mental health issues over the past year or so, or really my entire life. But I've been in a program for it for the past year, and it's hard. Mental health issues are really, really hard. They're really, really hard to fight. They're really hard to push back. And it's not addiction. It's not anything like what Sorsby going through. The only kind of similarities is that it's also a mental health thing. But yeah, relapses are so easy. And it is incredibly difficult to be able to say confidently that the behaviors that led me to be in this program, this outpatient program, not nearly as serious, but that the behaviors that led me to be in this program aren't going to happen again, because they still happen to a lesser extent. It's just something I have to manage. Who's to say that, Sorsby, he, especially again, you can gamble from an app these days. It's so easy to do. It's available in, I was going to say, most states, because that's the legal. Then we get into prediction markets and Kalshi and Polymarket and all these other ones. And, now DraftKings apparently has their own prediction market because they're advertising being available in 50 states, which, boy, that really, if the lines weren't blurred between prediction markets and sports betting before, now they certainly are. You can do it so easily. It is so easy to gamble these days. And it's one of those situations where, I totally emphasize, for one, I am, on one side of the equation, I really want to be empathetic to Sorsby. Yeah. I really, really do. He went through the rehab. He's done the work, at least presumably from what we could see. And I absolutely want to take him at face value, that he is acknowledging. And, I know there are all these conspiracy theories. There are all these theories out there. There's all this, allegations of bad faith out there. And I understand the temptation. I really, really do. There's so much money at stake. There's so much pride and prestige at stake, reputational value at stake. But I want to take him at face value. I want to feel like he went to rehab for all the best reasons. And I really do feel like he did. But even if so, the risk of rehab is incredibly high.
Well, Mike, you touched on something about the opponents and not knowing, what you don't know. I wonder if the schools that are on Texas Tech's schedule, whether it's collusion, whatever you want to call it, if they all collectively said, we're going to forfeit every game against Texas Tech this year, then they have no game film for the CFP committee. And is there a chance that they don't play a game all year if this doesn't get worked out before the season starts?
Well, that's what I think becomes so interesting about Texas Tech's position on this. Completely can understand up to this point the position they've taken to support their athlete who is going through something difficult. But if you run into this situation that you're referring to, or something even similar, even if it's just one game, I don't know how you can defend. I don't know how you as Texas Tech can sit there and tell a conference mate, like, you're overreacting. You're being crazy. Like, these are all rules that everyone has agreed to all along, that you're not going to play somebody who's gambling on their own games. And he's admitted to doing that. Like, that's just a standing understanding within sports at the collegiate level, the professional level. And I understand we can talk about the differences between pro and college and collective bargaining, because we're going to come back to that at every time. But like, if you're Texas Tech and you've got somebody canceling a game against you, you're really going to argue with them? Like, these are all things that we've all believed forever. Like, what are you going to do?
Well, you brought up the collective bargaining piece. I mean, that's the difference. I mean, if this is a pro league, we're not even having this conversation.
No, we
Which
definitely
Texas Tech
don't.
doesn't want. They don't want to collectively bargain.
Well, clearly, given who's leading the
Right, that's
the
what I'm
College
saying.
Sports Act. Yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, if collective bargaining, this does not happen, because like, we have Section 301 of the Labor Management Relations Act, which bars any or preempts any state disputes, state lawsuits that require interpretation of collective bargaining agreement. And this certainly would, which is the long-winded legalese way of saying you can't sue over things in a collective bargaining agreement, at least without going through arbitration and doing everything that needs to be done in a collective bargaining agreement. That's been incredibly well litigated. You can go to the Williams v. NFL case back in the late 2000s for a good example of that. But yeah, no, this does not happen under a collective bargaining agreement.
So if I take a cynical approach to this, and it's hard to think I would ever do that, but I'm with you, Sam, and that you want to believe this is genuine. It's someone who's really going through something that needs help and has done that. But if I'm a lawyer, am I now viewing mental health as this get out of jail free card? And how can that apply to other things? Whether I did something horrific while drinking, now I've got a mental health problem when it comes to drinking. And then if I go to rehab, then am I in the clear? If I have anger management issues, and that turns into something where it seems like such a gray area to me, that if we say this gambling addiction is a mental health issue, therefore the behavior is, in this case, acceptable to a certain degree, where does that line stop legally? Or does this just mean as long as you have a good lawyer and you've got money, you can kind of do whatever?
I'm not sure. I mean, that gets really complicated, because I will say, and I think it's really important to keep in mind here, this is one judge. This is one district court. I think people think about precedent, think about legal precedent, and they think about the Supreme Court, and they think about when the Supreme Court makes a decision, it changes the law across the entire country. And it does. That's kind of the way the legal system works. But the legal system is a pyramid, where the Supreme Court's on the very top and we are at the very, very, very bottom. We're at a district court, and not even a full decision on the merits. It's an injunction decision. And one that didn't even produce a written opinion that judges can really necessarily cite to. I mean, you can still cite it, obviously, but I would not be surprised that if we got 50 other lawsuits about this, like 50 copycat lawsuits to this, players would go 0-50 on this. Because I can't say that for sure, obviously. I didn't think Sorsby would win here, but this does not set a binding precedent. This is what we call persuasive precedent, where judges can certainly cite this if they want to, if they feel like it helps their, if it supports their already kind of, the opinion that they already have. But judges regardless of where it is. I mean, I guess the only kind of instance where it might be binding would be at that same court, but that's one court. If we saw the same lawsuit in Florida, if we saw the same lawsuit in California, in Louisiana, in Massachusetts, and any of these other states, it would not be binding at all. And again, I think I really do think that players would go 0-50 on these cases if we had similar cases, and we've seen that bear out in all these eligibility rule cases. Because at the end of the day, this is just one of the nearly 100 eligibility rule cases we've seen over the past year and a half. Sure, the factual circumstances that got us here are very different, but in those eligibility rule cases, we have seen, like, if you look at some of the cases that have been filed, a lot of them are basically one-to-one replications of each other, where you just replace the player's name and maybe the schools that they went to. Sometimes not even the schools that we went to, because boy, there's a lot of community college overlap with JUCO overlap with some of the players who have been suing. I probably not coincidental, probably just something where I don't know, can't speculate on that. But even in those one-to-one cases and those one-to-one fact patterns, judges have said completely different things. So it's one of those things where precedent really, the idea of precedent here really has to be taken with a grain of salt, because it's not binding precedent, and judges across the country are free to say, yeah, I don't know what that guy was thinking. I'm definitely not following what he said. I don't know if that answered your question, though. Yeah, no,
it provides a lot of clarity around how much this one ruling may impact future, and factoring all those factors makes a lot of sense. Is there anything we're missing before we get into our unilateral decision that needs to be talked about?
I mean, I think that the sheer shock of this outcome and this decision, and again, it's not a final result, it's not a verdict, but it's a decision that was made and will have ripple effects. And personally, I was in Vegas, I was at NACTA when the ruling came out, and the pure just surprise, certainly angst from some people, but the overwhelming feeling and emotion was just shock and surprise that we were even going to have this conversation. It felt like such a foregone conclusion of how this was going to go among the people in that room, that when it went the other way, it just kind of changed like the entire attitude of the convention of like, everybody was so ready for the conversation that was going to be had. And it just kind of flipped everything on its head about like, okay. And then you started seeing, the Nebraska that we've talked about, Georgia, we've talked about, a handful of other athletic directors and departments coming out in pretty vocal support of camaraderie against like this ruling. And it just, I think it speaks into kind of what Sam was saying about like, it's not necessarily precedent. I mean, I think so many people were so shocked and surprised by the outcome that I think it's reasonable to expect that other judges in other jurisdictions would rule differently, given just how genuinely surprised everybody was with the ruling. And so I don't think that it's necessarily precedent, but I do believe that it's a consideration everybody else has had to make now. And it's like, you kind of just, you operate with the information you have at the time that you have it. And now we all have a new data point on information that we never kind of even considered. And it has led to all these other things about, what does the Big 12 do about Texas Tech? What does Texas Tech do in this situation? What do the potential opponents do? And it's opened this whole new line of questioning that really wasn't, I mean, maybe people had it in the back of their heads, but it was certainly not on the table because no one really thought it was real. And I think we've seen that. And so it's really just kind of thrown everything for a loop for the last couple of days. And it goes back to the very beginning of this conversation, because it is counter to one of the core tenets of competition. And I think that is the thing that's really, got people up in arms. But it's easy to get that way, but it's also important to remember, Sam said it, this is not a ruling on the merits. This does not indicate exactly what the outcome is going to be. It's a judge saying, like, if he were to be ruled, if the court finds in his favor and later in the process, had he been suspended now, it would have irreparable harm. And so I think that's important to remember when we talk about, is this injunction, like, is that really this key piece of information? It will have very, very short-term impact, especially if he's able to play. And now it's leading to all these questions that the others have to determine that they probably didn't think were questions they had to answer coming into this situation. So it's interesting. It was very interesting to be in the room with all those same people who were having these conversations and very clearly thought that this was going one way and it didn't. So it's been interesting to see the ripple effect of that.
Yeah, and on that note, just a quick kind of follow up on that. There have been a lot of think pieces out there that have said, "Oh well, now based on this decision, the NCAA's gambling rules are completely unenforceable." That's certainly not true. That's absolutely not true. There's been a lot of people who have taken this way too far in terms of their think pieces, and I understand why they're doing it. I understand the motivation to do that. I understand the temptation to do that because this is a big deal, and people are justifiably getting freaking out about this. I totally get it because, well, yes, it is not the case that this has completely dissolved the NCAA's rules against gambling. It also I also can't say that this is going to be just a blip on the radar. Like I say, I'm pretty sure that if we get 50 more cases and the players are going to go for over 50, I can't say that for sure. I certainly can't. Even before the decision, I might not have said it, honestly, because that's just how inconsistent a lot of these eligibility rulings have been. But, it is somewhere in the middle. It's somewhere in the middle between all that. And at this point, we just don't know where in the middle it is, which side of the spectrum it's closer to, because we are going to get copycat lawsuits out of this. It is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. We're going to see other players who follow a very similar path to this, who, they gamble, they maybe even bet on their own teams like Sorsby did, and they immediately go to rehab and claim it as a mental illness. And in a lot of these cases, it might actually be a mental illness. A lot of times, let's be honest, again, I'm taking these players as the benefit of the doubt. It might actually be a situation where they also have a gambling addiction, because, boy, if you look at the statistics on gambling addiction among young people, especially young men in this country these days, it is stark. But are they going to be able to win? We just don't know. And is it going to lead to a situation where the NCAA gambling rules are, in fact, completely unenforceable? I don't think we're going to get that far, but we're certainly getting close to the line that I think a lot of people are comfortable with.
I have one more clarifying point. It's been mentioned numerous times that this has nothing to do with antitrust, right?
Yes.
This argument, this claim, can we get your couple-minute perspective on how this is different than so many of the things that have been brought forward previously? And we talked previously about the bill and how it would grant this, narrow antitrust exemption. Some people want a bigger antitrust exemption, but none of that conversation matters to this ruling. And can you explain for us why that is the case?
Yeah, so a lot of these eligibility rule cases, starting with Pavia and going through a lot of them, have been based on antitrust, based on an argument saying you're inconsistent or arbitrary or incorrect application of your rules have led to me being restrained away from this market, being kept out of this market, and therefore I have an economic kind of claim against you based on antitrust law. This is not that. This is a breach of contract case where it's similar in a lot of regards. It's not, there's some intricacies, kind of deep diving into the legal theory where it is different, but it's very similar to what we saw with Trinidad Chambliss, where he argued to a Mississippi state court that the NCAA breached their contract, where he's a third-party beneficiary, their contracts with Ole Miss, by not properly considering his medical hardship claim based on medical issues that he had back at Ferris State. It's very similar legally to that argument, where Sorsby argued successfully, as we saw, that the NCAA breached their contracts with Texas Tech, to which he is a third-party beneficiary. They violated the duty of good faith and fair dealing by being too harsh on his suspension of him. So it's not an antitrust case. So any kind of antitrust exemptions in the PCSA in any other proposed legislation would not apply to this. Doesn't mean that the PCSA doesn't cover this. I mean, there is some debate over this, but it does preempt state law to a certain degree, and it does include in its provision saying, well, yes, generally speaking, state contract law is not preempted by it. that only applies to things that are not covered by a very short list of things that are in subsection A of the bill of the section. I think it's section 113 of the bill, where it says where it includes eligibility in there, and eligibility rules as included in the PCSA before that include the ability for the NCAA and similar organizations to suspend players, declare players ineligible based on gambling. So there's some debate on that. I know Tom Mars, a really prominent sports law attorney on Twitter, has argued strenuously that it is unconstitutional for the federal government to restrain states in that regard. Well, we'd have to see how that plays out.
All right. Unilateral decision. In April, futures numbers came out, over under totals, 11.5 for Texas Tech. You taking the over or the under? I kid. We can't give gambling advice, but I do want to hear your answer to that off camera. Our actual unilateral decision. If you're advising and guiding any of these entities, whether it's Texas Tech, NCAA, CFP, Big 12, take any of those. What is your directive you give them and why? And I know, Sam, you've thought about this a bit, so we'll start with you first.
Yeah, and actually, I think my answer is changing a little bit from what I put in our little guiding document to a certain extent. I think to a certain extent you have to let the process play out, because yes, I've said like legally speaking, looking at this injunction, it seems like he's going to play. But there is one other entity who has not spoken yet here, and that is the other side of the federal government. Not the, well, I guess the federal government in general, but the attorney general's offices across the country. It is very, very possible, and I'm not going to speculate a lot deeper than this, but it is very, very possible that Sorsby's actions here violated the Wire Act. And that carries potential prison time, but also more importantly, it also might give the NCAA ground to be able to step back into this and say, well, now that he's been indicted with a federal crime, you can't say that our punishment's too harsh. Maybe that would carry water. Maybe it wouldn't. Maybe it'd also be something where they don't necessarily have to worry about it because he's sitting in jail or prison while waiting for a trial. That's kind of stark to think about, and probably not. I mean, just given the nature of the thing, they're not going to he'd be very, very much bond eligible. He wouldn't be a flight risk. Just all those different factors in there. But I think part of it has to do that. But presuming that's not the correct answer in terms of, we want to see something now. We want to, have someone in within the NCAA apparatus do something about this, and do it in a way that doesn't violate the terms of the injunction. I think the Big 12 is the one that holds the most amount of cards here. Like the SEC and the Big 10 threatening over this, and Nebraska and Georgia threatening over this. I don't think Texas Tech is going to care that much, especially given, I find it incredibly ironic that they're, saying, oh, we're not going to schedule Texas Tech anymore, when there's already been so many moves by the Big 10 and the SEC to, decry Texas Tech's strength of schedule while also refusing to play them. Just look at what happened with Texas a few weeks ago. They're already not avoiding playing them, and I realize this is beyond football into things like softball, for example. But still, like, come on, really. But Texas Tech again is the one with the most power here, and I think they can certainly do something about this. I think they're probably going to do something about this in terms of maybe taking them off television, maybe taking away some of their television rights media or all of their television rights media, doing something to kind of pressure them to not play Sorsby. And we'll have to see if it works, both practically, whether Texas Tech says, and Cody Campbell say, screw this. If Cody Campbell says, I'll just pay the media fees instead, boy, that would be something. But also if they fight back with litigation, which I think would be incredibly likely.
I'd probably advise the entirety of college athletics. I mean, everybody's throwing their hands in the air going, how did this happen? And they're all right, but it happened because, once again, you haven't taken matters into your own hands and tried to solve the greater problem facing the current era of college athletics. Like, I probably say it every week, collectively bargaining this, at every level, and we talked about it in a full episode. I know how difficult this is going to be, but if there was collective bargaining and both sides are negotiating what the future rules of college athletics are going to look like, none of these lawsuits are happening. These eligibility lawsuits are solved. We're not in court over this. This is another flashpoint in today's era of college athletics that none of us could have ever foreseen happening. But once again, you have the ability to solve it. It's going to be hard, but we can figure it out. So you don't want to see stuff like this continuing to happen and leaving decisions in the hands of courts and people outside of, the purview of the group that thinks they're doing what's best for the collective interests of all institutions. Figure it out.
I'm with both of you. I and kind of a short term and a long term impact here. My belief is that the industry as a whole, it needs to preserve the fact that playing college sports is a privilege and not a right. And I would encourage the Big 12, if I was advising on that front, to take some pretty harsh measures to be able to ensure that this is, the schools get to stand on that, and the rest of the schools in the conference get to say this is how they want things to go, and they don't want to, just have this competitive integrity piece, and the fact that somebody is admitted to, basically doing the same thing that we've all kind of said without saying is like the worst thing that you can do in competitive sports as far as on the field integrity goes, and they're going to be allowed to play again. I would do everything I could to step in and make sure that didn't happen. Beyond that, I would take that same platform and say, this is why we need to acknowledge that they're employees. And I would take that step, to Joe's point about collective bargaining, and use this as the jumping off point, that if these are the things that we want to be true, then we know that we have to come to the table and have this real discussion and put these real parameters in place. And to me, that starts with employment. Collective bargaining could be the place that you get to, but to me, it starts with employment, to be able to make those decisions and give everybody the give and take, but just accepting the reality. We've talked before about accepting reality of gambling being, more in everybody's purview, and everybody gets to see it now. I think that the reality of these athletes being employees, and more than ever, it appears that we want to treat them like employees in some regard, with wanting to hold him accountable for these decisions. I think that it all goes hand in hand, and I think in the short term, the Big 12 can make some moves to put a ton of pressure on Texas Tech to make certain decisions here. And I think in the long run, I just think it's another data point about employment, collective bargaining, and why that is the reality of us being able to move forward with a system that we all recognize and want to be a part of.
I'm sure this will not be the last time we talk about the Sorsby status. Could be next week, could be 2 weeks. Maybe it's in October when he's no longer eligible. We'll find out. Either way, thank you for joining us for another episode of Unilateral Decisions.